Okay, cool. So I'm going to start screen sharing. Just responding to this person's question. We also have time for questions at the end, so don't worry too much about that. I'll go through more of that in a sec. But if there are any really urgent questions or if you're having technical issues, Simon is here to help us with technical stuff. And you can just send any issues you're having through the chat throughout. But yeah, I'm just going to start with the little presentation that I did up for us. Yeah. So yeah, this is the Cooperativism webinar. Welcome everyone. Just want to start first by acknowledging the custodians of the land that we're broadcasting this webinar from. We're in so-called Melbourne on Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung territory on land. They're the traditional custodians of the land of the Kulin Nation. Earthworker Cooperative and all the work that we do takes place on stolen land. And Indigenous sovereignty of these lands was never ceded. Yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that the years of oppression and genocide perpetrated by a colonial state are things that we have to realise, and we have to show solidarity with those fighting for justice about these issues. Yeah, so as you all probably know, there's a lot of things going on in the United States, an uprising due to the murder of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, recently, but also about hundreds of years of ongoing oppression. There's a lot of solidarity rallies happening in so-called Australia about this, but it's also about the similarities that the situation in the US has with what's happening here and what has always been happening since colonisation to Indigenous peoples, violence that's being perpetrated in our name by the police and by the colonial state. So yeah, we strongly encourage you to attend one of these rallies. They're all happening over the next, most of them are tomorrow, but over the next few weeks as well. I'm just going to copy and paste links to the events in the chat so that you can just click through to those as well. And I'm also copying and pasting a link to a really great collated resource of, it's pretty much like a full list of Indigenous organisations that you can contribute to with money, because that's a very easy way that you can contribute. Is that? That's not the thing that I wanted to copy and paste. Yes, it is. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's it. Yep, so there's a bunch of links there for everyone to have a look at. Yep, strongly encourage you to attend one of those events. Cool, I'll start screen sharing again. Where is it? I'm really good at this, as you can see. Yeah. So I'll just run through how the webinar is going to go tonight. So basically we've already started, running a bit late already, classic. Yeah, so done a bit of an acknowledgement of country and a little bit of an intro I'll do in a sec. Then about 6:40, each panelist is going to introduce themselves and their work. Then about 6:55 or 7, we're going to start the actual panel Q&A questions and discussion. 7:45-ish, we'll open the questions up to you, the audience, so that you can ask any burning questions you might have to the speakers via the chat function, instead of having to unmute everyone and do a speaking order. We'll just do it through the chat function. So if you could type out your questions, that would be really helpful. And we're aiming to wrap up around 7:55, and we'll share some links with more info, contact details, social media, how you can get involved in support and stuff like that as well. I realised I'm not presenting, sorry. And then aiming to wrap up at about 8 PM, but I have allowed about 15 minutes leeway just in case. So just so you know, you want to be kicked out exactly at 8 PM if we are going over time. Yeah, so just a bit of an intro. I'm Tilly. I'm an Earthworker organiser. I'm also involved in 2 small co-ops that are getting started up in so-called Melbourne. Been involved with Earthworker for about a year now. We've also got Simon, who's helping out with facilitating, timekeeping and letting you all in. And then we've got 3 speakers. We've got Godfrey, Eleanor and Tim. thank you all for agreeing to speak tonight. Yeah, and I just thought I would give a bit of an introduction about who Earthworker is, yeah, and why we're putting this event on. Yeah, so basically Earthworker Cooperative is aiming to bring together people from diverse backgrounds in practical action to solve the environmental and social problems that we're all facing. And we provide common ground where trade unionists, environmentalists, small businesses and people and other people can come together and work for a common cause. And we do this by establishing and facilitating cooperative businesses. We're involved with, or a member organisation of, about 5 co-ops at the moment, but always trying to start up new co-ops and always in that process, and it's very ongoing. Yeah, and they range from things like peer-run refugee, higher education support cooperative to Red Gum Cleaning Cooperative, which is an eco-cleaning co-op in Melbourne. And Ellie's going to talk about that a bit later. Yeah, and we also do this, try to meet our goals by establishing an Earthworker clause in union constitutions to try and have an Earthworker rep. And we want to have Earthworker reps in all the unions, and yeah, and try and bring together, yeah, environmental and social movements and have that really enshrined in the way that our unions work. Yeah. So I thought it would be good to start off by defining a few key terms so that we can make sure that there's no assumed knowledge or anything like that, and make it as accessible as possible to everyone that's here. So I've written out some definitions. Yeah, cooperatives, like, it's can kind of be made into whatever you want, but basically, to put it very simply, a co-op is a group of people that organise together as equals. And yeah, there's a few different types of cooperatives, but for the most part, this webinar is going to focus on worker cooperatives just by nature. But yeah, Seeds for Change has specified that there's about 7 different types of co-ops. So there's worker co-ops, service co-ops, consumer co-ops, housing co-ops, credit unions, community co-ops, and multi-stakeholder co-ops. Worker co-ops are owned by and controlled by the staff, and only those working for the co-op are members, and the co-op exists for the benefit of the workers. Yeah, there's things like housing co-ops where the cooperative is for and controlled by the tenants, and it's for providing housing and that sort of thing. Credit unions, you could be a member of a credit union or a customer of a credit union, a bank with a credit union. Yeah, but there's a few different types of cooperatives. Oh, all right, I'm going to stop screen sharing. Yeah, and then, yeah, I reckon we can get into each of the speakers introducing themselves. So I'm not sure what order we want to go in, but whoever wants to speak first, each of our speakers.
I can go, Tilly. Thanks for that intro, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's really nice at the moment to connect to the wider world of cooperatives and people who want to support them. So yeah, thanks for coming. So yeah, my name's Eleanor. I'm one of the founding members of the Red Gum Cleaning Cooperative, and have also volunteered with Earthworker since about 2014. So Red Gum, like Tilly said, is a worker-owned cooperative. We clean homes and offices in Melbourne or Naarm on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We launched at the start of 2018 with 5 members after 2 years of development. So we're still quite a relatively fresh cooperative. So we use natural and ecologically responsible cleaning methods, and including eucalyptus oil, which is where our name comes from, the eucalyptus tree, Red Gum. So when we were founding Red Gum, just to give like a bit of context to kind of where we come from, the worker cooperative aspect was really important to us. A lot of us were unemployed or underemployed, or in quite precarious employment, either in the cleaning industry or in the service industry. And also, like, many people probably already know this, particularly Godfrey, who works for our union, who represents cleaners, that cleaning workers are very vulnerable to wage theft and exploitation. So we really came together behind the vision of creating workplaces that could offer better wages and conditions, and where everybody working there has a voice. And sort of beyond that, not just to meet our own needs, but to build our capacity to contribute to the wider community, both through our work, providing good cleaning services, which I think we're all realising now are very important, and by helping provide another sort of providing an example of cooperative workplaces and helping make them accessible to more people, by being part of this growing network that Earthworker is trying to build. So that's part of our long-term vision as well. So sort of where we're at the moment, we sort of up until recently, the cooperative's been going very well. I think I'll probably talk a bit later about how the pandemic's been affecting us, but I think it's been quite a successful operation. We've managed to meet the work needs of our members, and kind of get to a place where we have a network of loyal clients, built largely through word of mouth. And we've also had the members who've joined the co-op since the original members started it have been sort of gaining their skills and learning how to take on various roles outside of cleaning. So it's been quite exciting to see that the cooperative model can help people take leadership in their workplaces and help to shape the workplace with their own ideas. There's definitely some struggles at the moment, which we'll probably chat about a bit later, but I'm really glad to be in a worker co-op right now and have a group of supportive people and community around me. So yeah, it's good to be here.
Thanks, Sally. Tim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks. Well, look, I'm really happy to be here this evening. I think it's Earthworker is a very worthy organisation. This is a very worthy initiative. I hope to be able to contribute something, but I also feel that I'm here to learn as well, and I'd be sort of quite sure that a lot of you have got things to bring to the table, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. I currently work for Boston University in the US with the Economics in Context initiative, and what we're trying to do is change the discipline of economics to make it broader and more able to cope with the fact that economic activity occurs within a political, social and environmental context. That's doubtless bleedingly obvious to you all, but that's not obvious to economists. So I mainly work in that space. When I'm not doing that, I am director of the School of Political Economy here in Melbourne, and what that's been set up to do is to provide a balanced and pluralistic courses in economics to anybody that wants to understand the economy better, for often for progressive purposes. And so we run introductory subjects. We look at economic history. Next semester we'll be speaking about alternative comparative economic systems. So that's where I'm coming from, and I've just glad to be here and look forward to talking with you all.
Thank you so much for coming, Tim. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to your input. Godfrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tilly. Hi, everyone. My name's Godfrey. I'm an executive director with United Workers Union and a co-founder of Cooperative Power Australia. It's really great to be here this evening with comrades, and I say that deliberately. Anyone who's on a seminar a Zoom seminar about cooperatives on a Friday night is most definitely a comrade by definition. And I think this evening, in terms of what I'm going to talk about, it's going to be very hard to fill Tasha's shoes, but and there's a lot of really experienced and knowledgeable cooperators who I can see in the audience for the Zoom, is more the intersection between cooperatives and unions. And I'm pretty well versed in the crisis of labour, for want of a better term, and therefore have kind of a bit of experience to bring to that table, and where cooperatives might fit in with overcoming that particular crisis.
Cool, awesome, sounds great. All right, well, I was planning to just jump straight into some questions to the speakers now, but yeah, should probably thank everyone for coming first. Sorry, this is my first webinar that I've hosted, so please forgive me. But yeah, we've got a few questions lined up for the speakers. What I was going to do is ask the speakers the questions, but then also put the questions into the chat so that everyone can see them and we can refer back to them in case everyone forgot what we were talking about, because I'm sure that it will be a lengthy conversation. But yeah, I think we'll probably just jump right into it. So yeah, the first question that is for the speakers, but also if anyone has anything they want to add in the chat that might be good as well, we could ask it at the end. But yeah, it's about how is the pandemic shifting the economic landscape, and how is this going to impact workers and communities in the future?
I might jump in there because how the pandemic's impacting the working class and its various different elements is taking up most of my days at the moment, and it has a very uneven impact. But where I think all this is going right now is that it's a choice between restoration and renaissance for how things might change coming out of this, and all factors are kind of mainly pushing towards restoration if we the people let it go that way. And I use those terms very deliberately in the sense that the late Roman Emperor Diocletian called his reign restoration and often referred to that, and they managed to turn around the crisis in 3rd century Roman Empire at the expense of the living standards of working people and the freedom that people exercised to forestall collapse for 150 years. And I use the term Renaissance quite deliberately in the sense of Renaissance Northern Italy and the rise of I guess, capitalism back then, which probably seemed a little bit better to some of the harsher aspects of feudalism. Not that there was anything to write home about, but did provide more space for a flourishing of at least some people's artistic, creative and scientific endeavours. And that is the space in which we find ourselves. We can push for a true renaissance, and I think cooperatives are really part of that, or we can restore a failed status quo, and it's not going to end anywhere good for workers.
Yeah, very true. I'm just putting in a definition of feudalism into the chat for everyone in case anyone wasn't sure about that term. But yeah, very powerful words, and I'm sure that you have a lot of first-hand experience given your work. So it's really important to hear from you about that. Do any of the other speakers have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. Yeah, it's really good to hear that from Godfrey, and I'm really interested to hear what Tim says as well, because I feel like I'm not very well placed to think about the big picture of what's happening in the economy. I feel like I've been quite narrowly focused on the activities of our particular cooperative and how things have been affecting us a little bit, just by necessity. So yeah, it's been quite a big setback, I think, for the cooperative Red Gum. So we decided to stop our domestic cleaning activities towards the end of March, just before we went into the stage 3 lockdown in Victoria, because you might remember that it was getting quite difficult to access things like hand sanitizer and protective equipment and sanitising supplies, and things like that. And with more people staying at home and families staying at home, it just started to really feel like we weren't prepared to manage all of the risks responsibly. So we decided to stop work. The other thing is that we rely on working in teams of 2, so that became another tricky thing to navigate in terms of social distancing and getting to and from work safely. Yeah, so fortunately we have been able to access government funding, which is helping. Not everyone in the cooperative was able to receive JobKeeper payments, but we've fortunately been we've still maintained our work for the Australian Services Union, where we clean in the evenings, where we were able to, because there's not many people staff there and they're not there during the night, we're able to be a lot safer and have a lot of space there. So that's been some income for the co-op, which we've then been able to help folks who aren't getting JobKeeper payment to do a bit of work and earn a little bit of extra income to kind of help balance things out a bit. So that was a good thing that we were able to do. Yeah, and so at the moment, like, restrictions are easing, the risk is, I think, going down, at least in Victoria. So we are looking at restarting domestic cleaning, but over the last couple of months, people in the co-op situation has changed, and our capacity is actually quite a bit lower than it was before the pandemic started. That's due to folks caring for vulnerable people or just having other stuff kind of going on. So yeah, we're in a bit of like a tricky situation, but we're just focusing on making sure that we've got really good training and infection control procedures locked in, and that everyone's up to speed with them, so that when people are ready to start cleaning again, yeah, we will have peace of mind, and our clients can have peace of mind. Yeah, and that was after doing consultation with our clients, of whom we have lost about a third of our clients, our home cleaning clients, mostly because of them like having reduced work themselves. Like, domestic cleaning isn't something that people tend to hold on to if their economic situation gets a bit more uncertain. And also people are at home a lot more, so they're starting to clean for themselves. Yeah, so like, we've been meeting frequently and trying to support each other. We're also looking at other kinds of services we can do that will allow people to work outdoors, like window cleaning or garden maintenance. Yeah, but yeah, it is an uncertain time. My guess is that with like more people working from home and not having a secure employment, that domestic cleaning won't be something that we can really rely on for income. So yeah, we're kind of continuing to think about how we can adapt. And yeah, it's been good to be continuing to meet and start working on projects together, because it was pretty weird just kind of suddenly not having our normal business to run together. So yeah, but yeah, it's been good to at least have those connections with each other.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I also think it's important to note that because you're a cooperative, you were able to sort of make that decision to stop cleaning democratically and decide that as workers, whether or not you thought that it was safe for you to be working, or whether or not you thought it would be safe for your clients for you to be working in the way that you were. And it's very different, I guess, to how things might be, say, in like a traditional business where you're just told when to start and when to stop by a boss. Whereas in Red Gum, you get to sort of, you make that decision together and we're able to sort of do it democratically.
And that was like, obviously a stressful and hard decision to make, but I'm glad that it was one that we were in control with. So yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to get that small scale, very single cooperative based information. But yeah, I think Tim, you could sort of give us a bit more larger context on how it impacted us on a bigger scale. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I could go a big picture angle to complement Eleanor's that really specific, important on the ground information. I'd really understand the present as a I guess a little bit like Godfrey, this is a real critical juncture or kind of potential tipping point for a neoliberal capitalism, which you could argue is a distinct variation of capitalism that sort of really took root from the 1970s onwards and was a successor to a somewhat more social democratic form of capitalism through the 1950s and 60s. Of course, it was imperfect, but higher rates of unionisation, and it certainly is a more degenerated form of capitalism that we've got. What all we've really got for our troubles since that time, even though there has been ongoing increases in economic growth, there's also been economic and financial volatility, an increase in economic and political inequality, increased corporate dominance of politics and the media, and an ongoing inability to deal with challenges such as environmental constraints, particularly climate change. So this point under the pandemic could be a way to really transcend this. And what's really interesting about neoliberalism is even the rates of economic growth have really only been about half of what they were. So even those really narrowing economic indicators pretty lousy, and then all the broader indicators terrible as well. So it's certainly a way of organising the economy which could safely go down the dustbin of history without any problems. So there's a really nice quote here from Naomi Klein. She's saying, look, if there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that moments of shock are profoundly volatile. We either lose a whole lot of ground, get fleeced by elites and pay the price for decades, or we win progressive victories that seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. It's no time to lose our nerve. So I think that kind of captures the moment. And you can see with the current government that there, in the wings, is the prospect of more industrial relations kind of erosions, a type of depression economics. Like they're very kind of keen to move away from stimulus spending, and there's that risk that they'll go to austerity. The obsession with gas-led, Freudenberg wants a gas-led recovery, and generally they're using the resources of the state to try to extend the life of dying industries rather than to grow new industries and new types of industries. And you don't really hear much about the cooperative sector in Australia, where the proof of concept is pretty strong. I was just sort of looking at some statistics today, what is it? 12% of the global population is involved in cooperatives in some form or another. There's 3 million cooperatives worldwide, and they employ 10% of the global population. Even in Australia, there's over 2,000, depending on how broadly or narrowly you want to measure it. So it's not as if we're dealing with a boutique part of the economy. It's managed to get a substantial foothold in the economy, even in circumstances that were not conducive to its growth. So it just makes you think, oh, what could be done if we had a more fertile environment in which to develop them. So I see these, the work of Earthworker and Red Gum, what everybody's doing, is potentially really important. So to summarise, I see it as a time of great instability, risks, but also great potential.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's also really interesting when you talk about the resilience of cooperatives and how many people they employ. There's actually studies that have shown that cooperatives are actually more resilient to times of economic collapse and that sort of thing, and that they fare better in times like this. And I feel like that is mostly because it's controlled by the people that are working in them, and they can draw from yeah, variety of experience and make decisions based on that. And it's just, yeah, quite interesting to see that, you know, traditional businesses can't handle any sort of change to the economy, but cooperatives seem to fare quite a bit better, generally speaking. But yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know if I don't want to jump in. Maybe I'll let the other speakers or other people comment. I don't want to turn into a motor mouth.
Go for it, Tim.
Well, let me just quickly add, there's a lot of stuff about industrial relations reform at the moment, the idea of you know, flexibility or productivity. What's really attractive about the cooperative model is that when you, in a conventional wage labour situation, which is all the government seems to be thinking in terms of, any worker is always going to say, well, look, if I'm more creative, if I up the intensity of my work, how can I be sure that there's going to be any gain in that for me, or will that just become a new minimum tomorrow? And it's a structural problem, and you can brush that under the carpet. But what's really attractive under the cooperative model, where yeah, under most structures, people's wages really come out of retained or residual earnings. You don't have that. So often cooperatives have got a wonderful record on productivity and innovation. And even if they come with their own sets of challenges, I don't want to sort of idealise this form of industrial organisation, but it has particular strengths, and it's notable that it's not on the public radar. Like, obviously the coalition don't mention it much. You don't really get much of it from the Labor Party. And I think that it should really be bandied around in public discussion because there's a strong evidence base to say that it's a real blind spot.
The IR reform, so to speak, coming up is taking a little bit of our attention as a union, as everyone could imagine, and our analysis amongst the leadership cohort of the union is that this round of reforms is not, like, pushing in a neoliberal direction, even on its own terms, is not going to produce anything other than some short-term profitability for some sectors, basically, particularly extractive sectors, pushing for greenfields agreements that will see them through for the life of projects. That has really significant implications, I think, in the ability for the labour movement and the climate action movement to link up and work together, because it's going to shut unions out of those projects on an ongoing basis. And if we want to have a good transition, then applying the cooperative principles with workers who work in those projects and those sectors is going to be absolutely critical. Our delegates at one of the refineries, for instance, have worked through how do we participate and build an economy that works for tomorrow, so that our colleagues, our co-workers in the next generation have really good refining jobs. And they've identified that building up a renewable hydrogen refining sector in this country is really critical as part of that. That's not cooperatives exactly, but it is a mode of cooperative and solidarity thinking at a particular point in time in crisis. And even if we didn't have this COVID-19 thing, I think this disaster cooperatives seminar would be hugely relevant, because just like this round of IR reforms, even if it succeeds on its own term, is not going to produce anything. The economic performance looks like a graph of declining marginal or diminishing marginal returns. Global growth is sputtering out. Global productivity growth is sputtering out. The system, even on its own terms, is facing collapse with its own logic, and cooperatives are a really strong part of the answer.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think it's quite interesting to note, and something that Ellie might want to speak about, is that there's been a bit of a history of increasing interest in cooperatives and a really high increase in cooperative businesses and everything starting up directly as a result of massive crisis like this, and like pandemics, or like the Spanish flu in the 30s, like in the Great Depression, was always a huge resurgence of cooperatives, or people were sort of forced to consider other ways of structuring themselves. And I just thought it would be, I think it will probably happen now, and I feel like it already is. But yeah, Ellie, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of started reading about it because it was giving me a little bit of optimism. But yeah, my knowledge is pretty superficial. But yeah, particularly it seems in the USA, I wasn't able to find as much information about the Australian context at the time. But in the kind of the void left in the economy after the stock market crashed and the Great Depression started in the US, there were no jobs, but that didn't mean that there weren't kind of like farmlands and factories, and there was still plenty to do. There was still plenty that people could do to meet their needs. So people just started these ginormous networks of cooperatives, and people just basically putting in a certain amount of hours per week and getting their needs met from these organizations. And I think in like California alone, like there was like 300,000 people who were kind of getting their livelihoods from these groups. So yeah, that made me kind of think that, yeah, it actually, when you start thinking of the economy in terms of it's actually about people meeting each other's needs. It's not about the stock market. Like that's not such a real thing. Yeah, that starts to make me think that, yeah, cooperatives do have quite a big role in helping people work together in that way.
Yeah, of course. And we've kind of already started touching on it naturally, but the next question is kind of about what we've already sort of been discussing, but more specifically. And it's, what role can cooperatives play in reshaping the economy for the better post-COVID-19, or during it, kind of like we are still now? And I guess we've already started talking about that, but I thought I should pose that question.
I think I've been re-watching Naomi Klein's The Take recently with Harvey Lewis from 2004, and it's a really interesting documentary that takes place in the wake of Argentina's 2001 financial collapse. And you can kind of see within that documentary some thoughts, contentions and narrative that Klein's coming up with around people power responding to economic shocks. And you know, that's a country now where there's, I think, just over 400 factories and workplaces that have been taken back by workers. And that is a really positive documentary, I think, to watch in times like these, about how workers respond to economic collapse and recession, because that's going to happen. Part of the problem that we're going to have at the moment is an enhancement of what's already going on, which is a decline in real investment. And co-ops are a really good answer for people to get in there and just do stuff, whether it's directly taking over things or finding spaces and gaps in the system. So I think that's a really positive future about what we could do together in the wake of a COVID recession.
Do you want to go next, Ellie? Maybe we should have an order of speakers, because I think otherwise we might be like those Warner Brothers chipmunks who go, "Oh no, after you, I insist."
Yeah, that could be a good idea. I was thinking we would be able to see the three of you, so you could see each other, but it hasn't worked out that way. I'm a Zoom expert, clearly. So maybe we just go alphabetical order.
Yeah, sure.
Ellie, Godfrey, Tim.
Yep.
We happy with
You
that?
go next, Ellie. Or
Sure.
is it my? Yeah, you go, Ellie.
I guess that's me. Yeah, so I do think worker co-ops have a role. I mean, I sure hope they do. And I think the main thing that the worker cooperatives can do is actually demonstrate to people that the economy is something that everybody should be able to shape. It's not something that we need to be subjected to by people who want to make large profits off our labour and at the expense of the environment. And that's something that being part of Red Gum and Earthworker has kind of really helped demonstrate to me as a worker owner in a really practical way. So like in our current context with Red Gum, like we've got a few of our members, because like I said before, you know, their circumstances are changing. They're not able to do much domestic cleaning, which is one of the main ways we've been earning income. And that doesn't mean that we say, oh, well, you know, see you later. Like we have these relationships, we care about each other. We can be creative and start working on other ways to meet our needs. Like a few of us have started chatting about, you know, starting an urban food growing project or branching out into other kinds of work. Yeah, so I think that I feel like I feel like cooperatives are not an end. They're kind of like they're like a technology or a tool that we can use to like adapt to changing circumstances. And that's something that I've seen us do time and time again together, because we've built these relationships. And I think that's important. Yeah, and even though, yeah, it does take a lot of energy and resources to start worker co-ops, but I think it is possible, and you can get to a place where you, like I think with the Earthworker project that we're looking at setting up this network of cooperatives, and that means that we can start to get some autonomy and have a bit more choice in how we direct our energy in ways that are beneficial. So like with Earthworker, you know, we're looking at, you know, building these renewable energy alternatives, having cooperatively owned secure housing, growing food, you know, building up the vulnerable people in our communities, healing our ecosystems, all the work we really need to do, which at the moment we can't always do because those aren't the jobs that are available. We're actually like saying, well, actually, if we actually band together, we can create those alternatives and create an alternative economy that's actually based on our shared values. So, yeah, I think it'll be good.
Okay. I just.
Tim, you're muted.
Sorry to do that classic faux pas.
I always do that, don't worry.
I just wanted to, it was interesting when Godfrey mentioned that Naomi Klein filmed The Take. I was just kind of thinking about that this afternoon as well. If you haven't watched it, it's a wonderful movie. It's probably on YouTube. And that is, if you're just new to the world of cooperatives and thinking about their potential, that's a goodie. The other thing that I think is good is a book by Eric Olin Wright called Envisaging Utopia. You can kind of buy that, but I think if you Google around, you go to his website, you'll see it's pretty much available online as well. And he really stresses worker cooperatives as well. And he's a great one for, yeah, he's kind of one of the best people in the contemporary space, trying to say, well, what would an alternative economic future look like, and what are the mechanisms by which we could plausibly get there? And so, yeah, I just thought I'd start with a couple of hot tips in that regard. I do think one of the delicious things about worker cooperatives is that they often appeal immediately to left-wing people and people of a progressive bent, and that's really great. But really, there's no intellectual reason why people of a right-wing persuasion should be hostile to them, because it's not. This is not Stalinism. This is not command socialism. And indeed, there's a book called Socialism After Hayek, which won an Austrian Book of the Year award. And so the Austrian economists are the most right-wing people possible. And they, even they've got to kind of concede, well, look, you know, people being in charge of their own destiny, running their own affairs. So it cuts across ideological lines. And I think that it would be interesting if to put the feet to the fire of these politicians that say, oh, you're of the right. You say, well, why are you hostile to this? Are you really just defending the interests of the privileged? So that's something else about it. There's a kind of fluidity about it. And there's tremendous scope. I guess when I think of worker collectives, it's useful to think in the former Yugoslavia, the entire economy was worker cooperatives. And the record of that is mixed, but in some ways impressive. Just like anything else, the scorecard is got some wins, got some problems, but then a lot of those problems were to do with errors of implementation or overreach or just naivety. But for a long time, like we can really learn from those things. And I think that I guess there's two lines of scholarship that are worth following in all of this. It's the kind of the big picture stuff where you're looking at whole systems made up of worker cooperatives, but then also it's important to have the expertise of people on the ground like Ellie that are actually running the cooperatives that have got the hands-on skills. And I guess on that point, another really hot tip I've got is on the Earthworker website. If you go to that section, Start Your Own Cooperative, they've got a real great collection of superb resources of just how to do it step by step by step. Things you've got to think about in terms of legal structure, all the nitty gritty. How do you manage? You know, it's a very wonderful thing. So if depending on your interest, you know, you can follow that really specific stuff, or you can do this big picture stuff, or you can do a bit of both. You know, I just think it's really worth thinking about, because if there is, I'm quite sure there is a better economic future out there. The economy is a human design structure, subject to human intent. I'm really sure that cooperatives are a very big part of whatever that better economic future looks like. So they really deserve our closest attention, because if you you don't want some type of state capitalism. It really is the extension of democracy, to have that economic democracy and for people to have that control over their own working lives, which in turn will tend to promote them being more politically engaged anyway. I think I better stop, because I think I'm just going to overemphasize just how potentially transformative they are.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about how it doesn't necessarily have to be a left-wing concept. I didn't even think about how, yeah, the right wing can have some co-ops too if they like.
Well, I just think you pick up any instrument or argument that you can to advance your cause. And the thing is, if you can find common ground with these people, like, you know, that the thing is that conservatives, like, you know, you've got people that are just simply opportunists that are in the payola of large mining companies, or essentially corrupt people. But then I guess you've got some people that just have that different vision of society, which is all about individual liberty and individual freedom, and, you know, whatever the limitations of that, you can sort of, I just kind of think there's something to be said for working with unusual suspects, and they're about as unusual as they come. But if you find, like, this is just for people going about their business, if you find that you can enlist those people and they're supportive, or you can talk, why not? If you can find, if you can work without people without compromising your ends or your means, why not?
I think, I mean, I'd nuance that slightly in the sense that in discussions I've had with rank and filers of many and very different political persuasions and backgrounds, and one of the reasons I really love union work is you work with such a diverse range of people and find what people have in common and what we can get together. Cooperatives do cut across the political spectrum, but the idea of workers running their own factories is very much an implicit threat to the political status quo as well. And because if workers can run their own factories and workplaces, then we can run the country. And so we will face entrenched opposition if we get anything going. And so we can work with people across the spectrum, but we will need to deal with people up the ladder.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Thanks for balancing the yin with the yang there, Godfrey. The thing is, what I think is that people in power political parties will initially be quite magnanimous about it. Oh, isn't this good? And then when it gets to a certain point where you have these highly efficient, dynamic, productive firms, like they'll kind of might tighten up a little. But you can really hoist them on their own petard about this, saying, well, what is it that you're against? You know, like what, you know, if you feel there's larger coherent intellectual principles and values that that support your position, well, what are they, and how can you bring them in to be against this? So I think initially you'll find them, I just think it's an opportunity, at least initially, you'll find them napping. It's kind of like easy for them to be magnanimous, where they think this is a marginal or boutique concern. We can probably exploit that space. And then if they try to kind of move against it, just through simply trying to maintain privilege, it will then be, you might be able to feed their words back on them at that point. I don't know, it's just an idea. It obviously needs to be workshopped pretty carefully, but I'll just sort of throw that out, and it's good to get that input back from Godfrey. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. You're breaking up a little bit there, so if anyone missed anything, just message Tim if you missed any vital parts of that. But yeah, I feel like it's an interesting idea, but the very idea of if the whole economy was cooperative, CEOs wouldn't exist, the 1% wouldn't exist, the share market wouldn't exist. So all of these people that are in power would lose their power. So I kind of feel like in some ways it's like, I don't think they would ever be in favor of it, but that's just me, because it would mean the very end of their existence, basically.
I was just going to say, I find from long experience, when anybody's saying something particularly powerful or salient in a progressive way, Zoom suddenly breaks up and they can't quite get their choicest points across, you know, and I think somebody up there is pressing a button. So just be, I guess we'll just have to go to text. If you feel you've got something too red hot to say, don't be surprised if it starts breaking up.
Yeah, Zoom's fascist. Nah. We were thinking about using Jitsi because apparently that's better for security and is more left-wing, but the connection's always really bad on Jitsi, so. We've kind of already gone into it quite a bit just by establishing how co-ops are different, but I guess sort of speaking more directly to how co-ops are responding really differently to how traditional businesses, I'm saying traditional businesses in terms of, yeah, companies have like a CEO and a pecking order, but yeah, how it's different to how they're responding.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we did touch on it a little bit before. One thing I was just sort of thinking when we're talking about the economic impacts and you know how cooperatives can be good for the economy, I was thinking about how if you looked at Redgum's response to the pandemic in terms of traditional ideas of the economy, you might think that we co-ops are really bad for the economy because we stopped working and we sacrificed profit and we did all of those things that you're not meant to do when you're a business. But if you're thinking about the economy in terms of a system for taking care of people, our response makes a lot more sense there. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a good thing if businesses don't feel pushed to make their workers do things that aren't in the best interests of the public or them, even if it leads to less profit. And if the thing that you are doing is no longer, you know, a viable business, then you should find something else to do. Which sucks, but yeah, I think that's a better course of action than trying to force it.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tilly. I think cooperatives are doing some really interesting and different things, and that corporations are finding it hard to keep up. And sometimes in my role, I have the opportunity or the obligation to speak with people who relatively high up in the political and corporate world. And it's really interesting because I will say the same things in this forum as I would say in those forums. And when you get CEOs and chairpersons and whoever else outside of a public forum or something where they have to perform, they know something's wrong in their own system. They can kind of feel it, and they try and find, very ways of getting out of it. It's like they can't even find their way through. It's like a bunch of aristocrats that are trying to find solutions on their own terms and struggling to get it. There's a real lack of confidence, and the disorganisation that we see in the labour movement and social movements today, I think, are just really a reflection of the underlying disorganisation of capital. So we do have an opportunity, but one way in which I'll just share a screen. One cooperative I'm involved in cooperative power is responding to COVID-19 is basically we're in a relatively fortunate situation to starting out in the sense that as a cooperative of other cooperatives and unions, we don't really have any running costs. So we're just giving up 100% of our electricity revenue and putting it back to deal with COVID-19 on cooperative principles. So essentially what happens is that we get revenue of about $50 per customer per annum as a cooperative that engages with a traditional retailer, and we're putting that back to people, and people can either choose as customer members to take that $50 credit or pass it on. And the $50 isn't really neither here nor there in the scheme of things, but it's the act of solidarity that can be incredibly powerful in the aggregate. And so most people are choosing to pass it on. And we're doing that a mixture of two ways. Those people who say they need that solidarity, they get their $50 back basically in the next bill. But a few times a year, we can then calculate the aggregate funds raised from people who want to pass it on and split it half to those people who say they need it. And so then that can add up quite quickly to quite large savings. And half of it's going through our NGO sister and member organisation, Union Aid Abroad, a feeder, to go towards fighting COVID-19 and the health emergency in the broader Asia Pacific region. And that's just one example of cooperative logic being applied to the particular crisis in what is essentially a customer cooperative. It's not exactly that, but close enough too. And in worker cooperatives, it can be even more powerful again.
Looks really fantastic. I just wanted to add, often starting a cooperative, it's a type of social change, and you've got I guess Ellie could speak to this, you're about raising people's confidence and raising their capacity, and it's a deeper thing to just running a business, I think it's, and I'll stop doing this soon, but one more thing to put in the kit bag. It's a great book by Duncan Green at Oxfam called How Change Happens. And it's written primarily for people that are working in the area of global poverty, like Oxfam types. But it's a wonderful book in that, it's got about 12 chapters, and each of them is about different ways of achieving progressive change. Using the legal system.
Sorry, Tim. The breaking up is just getting a bit hard to understand you.
Okay, maybe I'll stop the video and.
No, I think it's when you move your hands.
Oh, okay.
Like
moving
it's
about.
now.
Yeah, I think everybody.
Hand gesture, your computer doesn't seem to like it, and then it starts.
Yeah, I can just go to audio. Like everybody's already worked out. I just look a bit like Bill Murray, so you don't need to see me.
Also, who is the How Change Happens book by again?
Oh yeah, let me just boot that up.
Yeah, because I was just going to send a link in the chat and add it to the links we're going to send to everyone at the end.
Yeah, I think it's very useful in terms of, like how do you use power, how to do a power map, how to work with the media, how to work with political parties. It's just a real good one. And also in understanding yourself as a change maker, how to deal with complexity, because the economy and society are complex systems. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that. Also, there's one thing I just wanted to get in, just to generally buttress people's confidence that cooperatives are the way to go. Like, there's a lot of anthropological and other social science research that indicates what is one of the most distinctive things about human beings is that.
Not quite a bit again there, Tim.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it might even be a Wi-Fi problem at my end. Let me just open the door. You never know. Does that help?
I don't know. It's going in and out. We'll see how we go.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I think, yeah, we're a cooperative species. It's like part of the reason we've been successful is because we have this propensity to cooperate with other people. And so this runs counter to a lot of conventional wisdom and a lot of explicit and implicit signals people get in contemporary society. We're selfish and we're individualistic, and the evidence on that's just not there. And so just people that use arguments against all that progressive ideas run counter to human nature, it's not there in the scholarship. So I just sort of, I don't know, I just wanted to get that on the table at some time in the session. Maybe slightly a bit of a red herring. Anyway, that's me. I'll just pipe down now.
Can I ever speak? I just was listening to Tim, and I was just wondering, just thinking about cooperatives and what they're limited to, and it seems to me they're sort of limited to useful stuff, and that whereas most of the economy is based on sort of useless stuff, and I was just thinking about that, whereas like a lot of the economy is based on fairly pointless consumerism, and how do you, like cooperatives are more limited to things that are much more useful, I think, you know, like production of food or power or something like that. So, yeah, I was just wondering if you had a bit of response to that.
Sorry, Don, would you be able to write that down and we can ask it at the end?
Yep, sure.
Got a bit of time for questions. Sorry, it's a good question.
No,
just because we'll keep it to the end, just because I've told a few people who've asked questions to keep it to the end. Sorry about that.
okay, yeah, sorry.
Right. Would you be able to go on mute? You can just type it up and pop it in the chat, and then we can come back to it in questions. Is that all right? Thanks, Don.
No, you've gone on mute, Tilly.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself and forgot to unmute again. Does anyone have anything on what Tim was saying about that? Ellie or Godfrey? Or should we move on?
No, it was very well said.
Happy to move on. That was well put.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, this is, like our last question. So almost at the question time, everyone, don't worry. You will get to pick everyone's brains. So the final question we've got is just about what advice would you give to people wanting to start up a cooperative or support cooperatives or a more social economy?
Finding my unmute button. Yeah, I can have a go at that. I've written a bit of a brain dump. And I've just noticed that my comrade Jason from the Co-op has just joined in. I'm guessing on his dinner break while he's covering my shift at the ASU. So thanks for that, Jace. Yeah, so what's been interesting lately is I think I've had a lot more conversations in the last couple of months with people who want to start Worker Cooperative. So I think there definitely is more interest in them. So yeah, I've sort of written some notes here. These are just my thoughts, things I think we've kind of learned along the way. So the main thing is that that you really can't go it alone. I think reach out as much as you can to other cooperatives and people with skills, and generally people within the cooperative movement are really helpful and collaborative people, and they really want to see cooperatives succeed and have lots of information they want to pass on. That was a really huge thing for us, working with Earthworker, having advisors help us write our rules, people like Anthony McMullen, who I think is also with us tonight, and make sure that that's an ongoing thing, that you're still, even once you've launched, that you're still maintaining those relationships and learning from other cooperatives, which is something that we haven't always done as much as I think would have benefited us, because you do get a little bit kind of focused on your own work and the daily grind of running a business. But recently, having a bit more time on our hands, it's been great to connect with other cooperatives, and particularly the Resource Cooperative in Hobart, who have quite a few members here tonight as well. So I think if you're thinking about starting a worker co-op, you should start with something you know about, something that you are interested in, already have skills in, and then see that whether there's a need for it in the community, or potentially it's a space where, like with cleaning, that like arguably there's already well enough cleaning businesses out there, but there aren't many that are ethical. There aren't many that provide good conditions for workers. And for want of a better word, that can be quite a point of difference in terms of like a lot of our clients would be like, we love that you're a worker cooperative. You know, we really want to make sure that the cleaners are getting proper wages and stuff like that. So it can be kind of like something that is desirable to people. I'd also say to start with a small core group of people, not make it too unwieldy from the start, and make sure they're all committed to ongoing collaborative work, and do that visioning work early to make sure that you know what your shared goals are, you know what your expectations are of each other, that even if you're friends, that you think about like what the kind of standards of professional conduct you're going to have with each other, what kind of commitment you're expecting of each other, and that can help kind of smooth things out, even though I think it is inevitable with any group of people that there will be some conflict. There's going to be rough patches. It's quite a learning curve, I think, for a lot of us stepping into a cooperative workplace, because it's not something that we've got to practice. A lot of us have got to practice in workplaces a lot, especially if you're just kind of like a low-level worker that's getting told what to do, which has been a lot of our experience. Making sure you're not just thinking about the business is really important, but learning those soft skills, like how to communicate with each other, how to bring up problems in a way that is not making them personal, focusing on solutions, not blaming people. Everybody kind of feeling that they have that, it's their job to be a leader and to step up and do kind of difficult work when it's required, because you're going to have times where not everybody in the group has the most capacity, I guess. Another thing that I think there's often quite a misconception with cooperatives, that being democratic means that every single tiny little decision you have to run through the whole group, that it's going to be this like really laborious thing where you're having like 5-hour-long meetings and it's just a nightmare. That's not true. I mean, you definitely could do it like that, but more often, co-ops are able to create roles and give those roles responsibilities to make decisions within the policies that you've developed and agreed upon, and then you can, basically, thanks Tilly for clarifying some of my jargon, if those policies aren't working, you can change them together. Basically that remembering that the cooperative model is flexible, you can organise yourself and define roles within a group however you agree is best. But I think one thing that's really important, and one thing that we really emphasise, is to make sure that everybody who joins the cooperative has a clear pathway to membership and is encouraged to become a member, so they can come to own that, share that ownership and decision-making power. Because otherwise, there's nothing that would really differentiate you from a regular business. You might end up with a few owners and a larger number of employees. And one way that, that's part of us being part of the Earthworker network is that we're committed to that level of democracy. We don't want to become bosses. Yeah, got a few more notes here. I think one thing, this is maybe just my own personal take, but I think there can be a perception that having a lack of structure in a group can mean that the structure is less hierarchical. It's more democratic, it's fairer. That means you avoid certain people having more influence. I don't think that's true. I think it's important to acknowledge that there might be people in a group who do have certain knowledge, or they have more capacity to take a lead in organising. And I think it's really important to define that knowledge and those roles, so the people who have them understand that they've got responsibility and are accountable to the group. And then the group is then taking steps to pass on that knowledge and those responsibilities. And it can be uncomfortable to acknowledge where power imbalances might exist in a group. But I think that's a really important thing, to make sure then that all of the roles in the co-op can be done responsibly. And to remember that, like, if somebody is taking on leadership in a cooperative, that means that they're helping people make decisions. They're, well, not helping them, they're like making sure that, you know, the group is supported to have a really democratic decision-making process. And then they're helping the group follow through on those decisions. Their job isn't to impose direction on the group in the same way that a traditional manager might do or a boss might do. If hopefully that makes sense. So the last couple of things, be patient. It takes a long time to set up a worker co-op, and if you try to rush it, like I think it's better to spend that time working together, doing the work together, getting to know each other, trusting each other, before you launch and have to run business together. I think it's a bit like a marriage, except you have at least 4 partners. So you can imagine that it pays to, you know, kind of have those relationships be really strong. And yeah, just to start, if you're interested in starting worker cooperative, start talking to people about it. Yeah, start making those connections with other people and getting feedback. And yeah, talk as if it is already a thing that is happening, and then other people will get involved.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to check in. We're running a little bit over time at the moment, but I've allowed the meeting to go until 8:15. I was trying to allow about 15 minutes for questions to the audience, but are people okay, panelists okay to keep going until 8:15 if we need to, or are we wanting to finish right on 8?
I'm easy.
I'm okay to keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, if other panelists had things to say on that question, I reckon we can just keep going and then push the questions to the audience back a bit. We'll still have 15 minutes for questions.
Sure. I would echo a lot of what Ellie has just taken us through. I would big shout out to Anthony McMullen, though. It's a little known principle of international cooperatives that you have to get your constitution drafted up by Anthony, but it's definitely there. But I'd say that, like, the first thing would be, one, reach out to Earthworker. There's a lot of really good people, comrades, and experience and resources. Number 2, if you've got people who are kind of interested in this, is form a study group. You don't necessarily need to have a concrete plan in mind, but you know, learning about examples and discussing things together is a really powerful organising thing to do. And I think there's a reset reading group that has just been set up. It's a few rounds in now as part of responding to the pandemic, and there's some really interesting materials there, including the Reset 4 coming up on cooperatives. And as part of that reading group, the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals have actually set up quite a useful little website that I've put up for everyone now around so kind of some basics of what a co-op is and everything else. And the spin that I would also put on it, the element is, if you're in a union, hassle your union about it, because part of the crisis of labour is unions are structured to organise around investment, so have been very powerful historical agents to ensure a fair distribution of wealth generated through productive work. But as that investment has gone, that has faded away from underneath us, and there's a nuance there where unions need to change to organise for investment rather than just around investment. That can be quite reactionary at times. If you think about some unions agitating for a particular fossil fuel project to get a bunch of money from government, that is an example of organising for investment. That's not great, but it could also take forms of organising for ownership that is quite powerful and system changing. And if you hassle your union, eventually we'll work out together how to properly organise around for investment that changes the world, because cooperatives and unions are like bricks and mortar in building a new world together.
Well, I can scarcely add any improve on what Ellie and Godfrey have said, so other than so I'm in agreement with it. And just to emphasise, those manuals that are on the Earthworker site, they're really splendid things to inspect. And just to add that once you do get up and running, yeah, try to get some press in, you know, if you still have a local paper or with ABC radio. Like, generally people would want cooperatives to succeed, and sort of getting the word out can really get you off to a flying start. What I've noticed in starting a school of political economy, which is really sort of, it's not a co-op, it's like a one-person kind of pretend university, is I've really benefited from asking people for advice, and networks and word of mouth has been really important. And I've just been struck by people's generosity and support because you're striking out doing something that they think is desirable. And I'm sure that all holds for cooperatives as well. Yeah, that's it from me.
Cool. Yeah, all really great advice, and especially I didn't even think of lobbying a union to support co-ops a bit more, but yeah, it's great. Yeah, that's the end of the panel questions. So we can get into questions to the audience now. So if anyone who wrote questions in during that wants to copy and paste them down now so that we can see them, just because there's been a lot of stuff that's been sent through. So yeah, questions for the panelists. And I guess you three can just sort of pick which ones you want to answer, or would you like me to choose them? Or yeah, I don't know. Or depending on how many there are, we can try and get through all of them.
I guess we could just put your hand up first if whoever wants to respond. Yeah, sort of sign language, I guess.
I think Anthony's posed the saying question three times, so we should probably start with that one. I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I think personally, I know it can be a bit contentious at times, but I came to cooperatives through and the idea of going beyond capitalism, through engaging with the concept of market socialism as a reaction to the failure of the Soviet system. And so I think that there is, to me, it makes intuitive sense that whether it's an end point or a transitional arrangement, I don't know. But market socialism being, you know, the idea that you still have a market in goods and services in an economy, people still pay with things, but those enterprises are that function on that market are owned by the workers, is essentially that idea. So you still would have a state. The state would maybe guarantee some form of full employment. There would be some sort of system of solidarity trade globally. And then within the state, you would have enterprises. Presumably those enterprises can fail when they drop below a certain point, so not being able to pay a minimum wage as a marker of a non-viable enterprise, but through that failure, people could go and set up or join new cooperatives. I think some versions of market socialism I've read about have allowed people to set up traditional enterprises, but they can't sell it on. Once they're done with that, they have to sell it to their workers effectively, and the state acts as a source of funds to make that happen, to sell it at market value or the rate at which the owner has been paying tax for the last few years in order to not stuff around their tax. So I don't know of any. I think the Yugoslavia example is maybe probably the biggest one, and some parts of Cuba, but I'm not overly familiar with how they've gone. I think Tim's probably got some comparative analysis and experience about that.
Yeah, can I jump in? Do you want to go, Ellie?
No, go.
Interestingly enough, I've sort of just been, with the work I do at Boston, I've just been asked to complete a 30,000 word teaching module on capitalism and socialism in the 21st century. I'm not quite sure under the circumstances which the first author has kind of, I don't know what's come to me, but I'm sort of, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm quite happy to send anybody a draft of that actually, because I would really appreciate people's feedback on it, whether it's comprehensible or readable and whether you think it's balanced. But I think it's a really great opportunity for me to get my thoughts down about what capitalism and socialism are in the 21st century. There are, but I can't give you 30,000 words now, so let me be more succinct. There are many forms of market socialism, both as sort of theoretical models that have never been implemented, but also market socialism in practice. So the details are really important. The other thing is you can probably never have a fixed blueprint, because any economic system has got to continue to evolve in light of changing technology, changing circumstances, but also changing people, because the economy, the particular rules or institutions of economy don't just change what people do, they change who they are. So what I think should happen is that people certainly that are looking for a better world shouldn't get too bogged down in disagreements about the fine details of what the final endpoint looks like, particularly when initially it's often easy to agree on what the next step should be. They're often quite obvious, and there can be wide consensus. And the thing is, if you get those initial steps up, it completely changes the landscape anyway. So you have to revise what is the appropriate next step anyway. Just as you say, if you have some end goal, just by approaching it, you're probably going to revise what that goal is and how you should get there. So it's a kind of iterative, repetitive process. I think from where I sit, the idea of suppressing markets completely seems a little overambitious to me. But one thing I'd say about this is people often get thinking, oh, okay, do we have markets? Do we not have markets? Without really thinking about it's the institutional fabric, the formal and informal rules that markets sit in, which often determines whether they're socially beneficial or socially harmful. And so often a lot of the big struggles in society aren't so much about whether we have the market, but under what circumstances. But that said, I would certainly, in being broadly open to some form of evolving market socialism, I'd really stress that there's no pure economy anyway. Like there's always a level of impurity about them. And Eleanor Ostrom, that won the Nobel Prize for Economics, really kind of stressed how this notion of polycentric governance, that actually often, even if you go buy a cup of coffee, there's actually a lot of state governance in sort of regulating property rights and supplying money and health and safety commissions, and there's the obvious market exchange. But if you push ahead in the queue, if it's crowded, well, then that's social governance, like there's social norms. And so often when any particular economic activity, rather than thinking, oh, is this market or should it be run by the state? Even already, there's actually often 3 forms of governance on the hop. You know, you've got sort of the kind of social community governance, you've got market governance, you've got state governance. And so there's often a lot to be said for saying, how can we get those 3 forms of governance to line up in a way that's coherent? They're the main things I'd say. If people, again, if you're looking for more specific ideas of what exactly it could look like, the Eric Olin Wright book is nice. There's a really old book by Alec Nove called The Economics of Feasible Socialism. He was a great documenter of the failures of Stalinism. And he kind of, and I think we need to reflect on the failures of the past in order not to repeat them. That's an interesting book, though it's slightly jaundiced. I don't think his heart's really in it. But there's plenty you can learn from it. So yeah, that'd be my comment on market socialism.
Cool. We might move on, just given the time. It's 8 o'clock. What's the next question? Oh, there's been a lot of things in the chat that have come up. Does anyone have any questions that came up that they saw that they would want to speak to?
Well, this last one, I've been sort of trying to find one that I could speak to. This last one from Craig Johnson about how cooperatives can secure startup capital. That's one I'd like to learn a bit more about as well. It can be a little bit tricky, I think, for cooperatives to access capital because we don't you can't buy shares in a co-op we don't go on the share market. So like when Red Gum started, we basically started with the money from our buy-in, which is like a sum of money that members of the cooperative put in to basically purchase membership. It's a share in the cooperative. And so that was quite minimal for us. So we had pretty minimal startup expenses. Like we didn't even have an office. We were just buying a couple of vacuums and some cloths and storing stuff in our sheds, you know. So that's one way of doing it is raising capital from your members. Possibly other people know more about this, but there are things called capital credit units, I think. I kind of really want to throw to Anthony McMullen to explain them, but there are forms of cooperative investment that you could look into that allow you to get cooperative capital units. Thank you, Anthony Taylor. Can allow people to invest in a cooperative, but it doesn't give them voting rights in the same way that a normal share would give you. And then the other stuff. Okay, so Get Mutual website has great financial advice as well. It was a little bit tricky. Like sometimes worker cooperatives can't access funding for not-for-profits, and they can't access some of the funding that's available for small businesses. So we end up kind of falling through the cracks a little bit. But I also know that, groups like the Business Council of Co-ops and Mutuals are doing work to advocate for more opportunities for cooperatives. And another important thing would be to make the government's new enterprise incentive scheme available to worker cooperatives, which is where you get Centrelink payments while you set up a business, and you get a business mentor. But right now you can only access these if you have no more than 2 partners in your business. And of course, for a worker cooperative, you need at least 5. So that's a kind of another area where we slightly fall through the cracks. I'd be interested to hear what other folks think about funding opportunities.
The 2 co-ops I'm in are both very loosely self-funded. But it would, and I think one of us, because we registered as a sole trader first, and then the people in it are co-op, contractors to that, they were able to get NEIS, which is a very small payment, but the payments available to co-ops are very small, so that scheme would be really good if it does happen.
I think that we're not there yet as a union, or I don't know if many unions are really there yet, but eventually unions are going to have to act in coalition with partners in cooperatives and mutuals and some of the more established parts of that sector to set up some sort of like cooperative development fund within civil society. And I think that's part of it, like a broader range of reforms that can be quite boring to really go through, that are internal to unions to become organisations of workers that organise for investment and for ownership specifically. It's not there yet, but that I think is the precursor, and then the precursor to that old hope that never seems to come through of what about the industry super funds, because we need to really unlock that section of capital that do more than just buy shares and get engaged by corporate partners, which is basically what it does now. And eventually we'll break through there, but unions also respond to members. So the more members make the lives of officials like me difficult, frankly, the better.
I just posted an article on whether making the case for subsidies for cooperatives. Nobody should buy that article. I think Taylor and Francis will charge you $50. Maybe contact me, and I'm sure somehow I can find a way of getting it to you. I think cooperatives. One thing I've studied quite a bit is the economic development of Japan. They had a very distinctive form of capitalism, and also an industrial structure called the kariatsu. I'll kind of spell that for you, where really there was a family of firms, and often within that family there was a bank. Like the Kariatsu group had its own bank, cross shareholdings in each, and really it was that sort of institutional innovation that kind of explains Japan's post-war growth. Like there's no land or minerals there. It's not a big country. It became the second largest economy in the world through just arranging things in a more innovative fashion than we do here. Things can be done, and really just the fact that government's now decided to give everybody $25,000 to do a renovation shows what they can and can't find the money for. You think, gosh, what could be done? How many cooperatives could be started up if you could get a subsidy to do something like that? It really, I think a lot of things. It's important, I think, not to get pessimistic when we've got such a backward government that things can't change. The future's a very unpredictable thing. It's probably the biggest thing I take from my extensive study of history, that we shouldn't be pessimistic. We shouldn't be, maybe it's hard to be optimistic, but we should certainly be opportunistic and just sort of work out where your niche is and where you can potentially pull a rabbit out of the hat. And it's certainly this space of cooperatives is just that sort of space where we could, a society could really surprise itself. I think it's all there for the taking.
I just wanted to flag that it's 8:10. Do people want to keep going with questions? Because I know that there's quite a few that we've missed, but I know this meeting has been going for a long time, and I know that I get tired with 2-hour-long Zoom meetings. So do we want to keep answering the questions, or wrap it up there, and maybe I could note down all the questions, forward them to you, and we could post them in the event or something like that?
I'm happy to, if people have questions that I could help answer, I'm happy for folks to, have we got a contact up or something?
Yeah, so I was gonna do that as part of my wrap up, give contacts if people wanted to have their emails posted up. Cool.
Yeah, I'm really happy to chat to folks.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, sweet. So do we want to sort of leave it there? Okay, cool. Well, I'll screen share for a sec because I just was going to share some resources with everyone. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. Yeah, Earthworker is an organisation that I really believe in, and I really like cooperatives, obviously. Yeah, I was just going to share some resources because I know that we've been sending some through in the chat, and I'll try and consolidate them all so that you can all see them and refer to them again. But yeah, basically just wanted to stress that, yeah, co-ops are not the be all and end all, but they're just one way that we could change things and change our society. I think they're really radical and great. Yeah, I'm involved in 3, so you'd hope so. But yeah, so I'll just screen share so you can have a look at some of the links. That one. Share. Okay. Yeah. So if you can see that, I'll send all of these around as well, but there's quite a few there. And there's the Take by Naomi Klein, that's also on YouTube. I'll send all the links about the books that Tim mentioned. And I'll also, maybe I'll just put everyone's emails in the chat, or I'll post them, because do you want them posted on the Facebook page? I feel like that might be a bit, if you're putting them in public, if you don't want them put out there like that. But,
Yeah, maybe not on the Facebook.
yeah, okay, I'll pop them in the chat then.
Yeah, I can put mine in.
Oh yeah, if everyone just wants to put their emails in the chat, that would be great.
Maybe we could have a follow-up. Maybe we could have a follow-up email to all the RSVPs with some links and emails and everything.
Already onto that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to send around all the resources to everyone, and yeah, and that way, yeah, everyone's got the emails there, so you can get in contact with any of the people that you wanted to ask those questions to. But you're also welcome to post them on the Facebook page, or yeah, just however. You could also email us through our contact at Earthworker email, and we could pass them on. But yeah, there's just quite a few different ways that you could get involved in any of these projects if you wanted to, and a lot of those links send you to that. But yeah, for Earthworker, you could become a member, you could make a donation, you could start becoming an organizer, come and join us, join the dark side. Yeah, we're always looking for new people to join up and more people to be involved. We also have an ongoing newsletter. We've got Facebook, Instagram. Yeah, and we also have a number of different cooperatives in our network that you can also become a part of, like Cooperative Power that Godfrey is from, like Red Gum Cleaning, you could hire them for cleaning. Godfrey, you can become a customer and get your electricity retailed through Cooperative Power. If you're a member of one of the member organisations, but that's, yeah, maybe Godfrey could run through who those are again, because I can't remember. I know Earthworker's one, but yeah.
Thanks, Tilly.
Just join Earthworker and it's no worries.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have been involved and to meet you all. Thanks so much.
Yeah, great to meet you, Tim. Yeah, I've learnt a lot tonight.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you to all of our audience members for being so patient. Yeah, and thank you for our speakers. I really appreciate it. It was such an interesting session.
Yeah, everyone. Yeah. Thanks, Tilly.
All right. I think we'll leave it there, but I've got all of your emails through Nation Builder. I promise I'll keep them secret, but I'll send out a follow-up email so that everyone gets all the details, and yeah, I'll include people's emails in that so you can ask the questions that we missed. I'm sorry about that, we ran over time, but I guess there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. All right, so I'm going to end the meeting and kick you all out.
Thanks, Tilly. Bye.